Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 31 of Music is Not a Genre. No, you are not seeing me if you're watching a video because it's a very special episode. I'm taking a rare, actual vacation this week, but I didn't want to leave you hanging. I didn't want to leave you with nothing this week, so I'm doing something I've never done before. This very special episode of MxG is the first ever retrospective episode, which is a smart-ass way of saying it's a rerun. But it's not any old rerun. It features the first ever 3 episodes of this podcast, dating from October and November of 2019. I've never shared these since at least that date, and I've certainly never put them together. This is before this podcast was even called Music is Not a Genre. You're going to have to stay tuned and find out what it was called at the time and why it was called that and where it came from. The reason there are 3 here is because these episodes were a lot shorter at the time. And even though much of the elements and the idea behind this podcast are very much the same as they were in the beginning, you're going to hear and see a lot of differences. And that's why I can jam 3 into this week's slot, because of how short they are. But fear not. Talk about not leaving you hanging. I'm also going to feature at the end of this podcast the 4 songs that are spotlight songs for these 3 episodes. I'm going to tack on to the end of this podcast, so you know what I'm talking about when you hear those episodes as well. And as always, thank you for watching and listening. Please take a moment to support this podcast at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. Go like, share, subscribe, watch, etc. at youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. Go to nickdimatteo.com, sign up for the newsletter at the contact page, or go to the shop page and get some t-shirts. And please support and listen to my band Rec at recarea.bandcamp.com. Thanks for listening to this intro. Now let's dial up the Wayback Machine. Ooh. Hey everyone, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to week 175 of 4T, the Thursday throwback track. For those of you who have been reading along for these last 3+ years, you will know that last week I wrote that this week would be my first ever video episode of 4T. This is something I plan to continue indefinitely. For those of you who have not been reading along, who don't know what 4T is or why I keep repeating that, what I do is I take music from my collection. I started out with my cassettes. I went through those, and I went through all of my 45s, which are small single discs made of vinyl, for those of you who have no idea what that is, and the related discs. And now I'm onto my LPs, which I will continue to plow through until I get to my CD collection. And I talk about what made or makes that music important to me, certain elements of that music. I might tie it into some larger theme, and then I tie it into a song of my own, and I talk about how that music influenced what I do, and how music in general, all music is related. And my hope there is that we're both learning something, we're both enjoying the music. You get to hear maybe music you haven't heard before, whether it's the music I'm talking about or music of mine. I'm hoping that you are listening to as much as you can of what I post, and or that it's music you have heard before and it's something you're excited about and want to talk about, and that either way, as I end every post, discuss, damn it, I hope that we do have a discussion. And I'm hoping that these video posts create an even larger, more vibrant discussion, because I'm actually physically discussing. But for those of you who do prefer to read or don't have time to watch this entire video, I will be posting the text below, what I call the untranscript, because it will never and is not in any way a word-for-word rendition of what I'm saying right now, because I honestly have no idea what I'm saying right now. What I do continue to do and will do every week is write out my thoughts, as I've been doing, on the release that I'm talking about and on the music of mine that I'm tying to that and all the other things that I tend to write. And I will be posting it under the video. And just so you know, all of these videos will also be posted on YouTube, on my YouTube page, and they will also be posted on my website, nickdimatteo.com. If you go to, I believe it's the video, or go to the actor page, that's what it is. I think it's nickdimatteo.com/acting or actor. it's on my menu. I don't know. I only happen to be the one who created it, and I completely forget. But you'll find it there. You'll find it on YouTube, and you will right now especially find it on Facebook. I believe I might be posting these on Instagram too, but we'll both have to wait and see. So with all of that said, let's get into the actual 175th episode of 4T, the Thursday throwback track. Promise you I won't be doing that every week, unless somebody, really loves my fingers. And this week, I thought I'd start out with something easy for me anyway, since it's the first video. It's one of my top 5 bands, and I'm one of those guys who has at least 15 top 5 bands. The Cure, and their seminal release, double album, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. It is an album that hit me the minute it came out. Those of you who are old enough to remember, new music was always released on Tuesdays, and the Tuesday this was released back in 1987, I got it right away. I had already been turned on to The Cure by a good friend of mine, Mike Smith. He was playing songs from my all-time favorite Cure album, Head on the Door. I urge you to listen to that too. And so when Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me came out, I had to get it right away. And it was not at all a disappointment. The Cure is one of the handful of bands from that era that showed me what my music was going to be. It fed directly into my brain, my ears, my subconscious, my heart, and in each way, each of these handfuls of bands had something in common. First of all, let's go with 3. We have The Cure, we have Prince, and we have U2. They all sound very different. What do they have in common? Number one, all of the leaders or most of the band members were born about 10 years before I was, so they were kind of like big brothers to me and mentors, unbeknownst to them, and it really showed me how possible it was to take many disparate influences and congeal them into something new, something innovative, we all probably know, and most of us know, how Prince did that. U2 came from a punk and post-punk background. They added cinematic elements and all the other elements, blues and things that they added eventually throughout their career, electronic. The Cure was also punk, post-punk, goth in their own way, but the thing all 3 of those bands had in common is that they were also pop. And as many of you have heard me say a million times, I revere the pop music form, whether that means music from the classic era of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, or the Beatles, my number one and always will be, eras like that, one-hit wonders, or bands that you might not readily consider to be pop or popular music, but who always strove one way or another to create songs that, and I'm going to read my notes here now, that had emotional depth, musical intelligence, innovation, and accessibility. And the accessibility part, of course, is the pop part. And everything I do, I try to imbue with all of those things. Again, emotional depth, musical intelligence, innovation, accessibility. I believe firmly that U2 did that. The Beatles did that. Let's say the Stones did that, if you're a fan of the Stones. Prince certainly did that. And this week's band, The Cure, absolutely did that. I just read an interview with Robert Smith in Rolling Stone, because they're coming out with 30th anniversary of Disintegration, one of my other favorite albums from them. And he talked about how even when he was teens and 20s, working with Susie and the Banshees and people like that, he always had one of his ears towards the pop music world. So they had, swirling, teeming, sonic, cinematic palettes, very ambient, dark in many ways. And from out of that, and even before that, and including that, came these very tight, strong pop songs that still were able to capture certain key elements of The Cure, which again, I'm going to read my notes, and what I wrote here is that they were able to express vulnerability. They were a little twee, you know, a little light, a little frothy, a little frivolous. They were dark, often dark. They were playful. It had a sense of humor or just a wordplay, things like that. They were sonically rich, whether it was the way, you know, Robert Smith played guitar or how the music was produced and arranged, whether they used the, you know, ambience of the keyboards and the guitar and vocals, or added the electronic elements and things like that. And they were catchy. I'm willing to bet that almost all of us know at least one Cure song. Maybe it's Friday, I'm in Love. Maybe it's Just Like Heaven. Maybe it's, Love Song, Pictures of You. I don't know. There's, you know, a dozen others or more hit singles or lesser songs, B-sides, album tracks, things like that. But one of the reasons why we do is they were diverse. They are diverse. They're still around. They're still creating music. They have a new album coming out soon, and that again, like U2, like Prince, like so many other of my favorites. It's what I try to do, which is I don't believe in sticking to one single genre or thinking that all of the music that I do has to sound the same, and neither did any of these bands. They might have signature vocals, which hopefully any, you know, good artist does, but even then there was and is a lot of diversity in there. Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me is probably, I would say, their most diverse album. It had elements, and again, going back to my notes, it had elements of what I call, or what, you know, Northern soul. It had elements of goth, of course, of pop, of the kind of college rock, modern rock, what it was called at the time. It had punk. It had electronic. It had ambient and orchestral and cinematic elements as well. In some cases, one song had all of those elements, and in other cases, it would bounce from song to song and show off different aspects of things like that. There were 3 singles from this album that charted in the U.S. and around the world. The first one you may not remember was called Hot, Hot, Hot. It was a big dance single. There was a dance remix, things like that. It had a great bass section, but it also had a great horn section. It was not quite the usual Cure song, but it was them and Robert Smith in particular kind of branching out and showing a different side. Then there was the big single of the day from this album, Why Can't I Be You? Many of you may know it. It has that kind of really quintessential Robert Smith vocal, the kind of vocal breaks he does, as little, you know, mini yodels and things. It's something I do a lot too when my songs call for it. I'm sure that was why or where I got one of the places I got that from. It shows how clever he was and is with wordplay and for the phrases he was using. He could take a phrase that seems like an everyday phrase, turn it into something else, or maybe it wasn't even an everyday phrase, but it became one. And then the third single is Just Like Heaven. It's a song that is, to me, near perfect. It's been covered dozens of times. I have played it live acoustically and with bands many times. I continue to do that. Just last month I played it solo. I've played it with the band that I work with who does 80s covers, and it's one of my top, again, 5, I guess, favorite Cure songs. I think it's also one of the best songs of that era. I think it probably has outlasted Why Can't I Be You, and certainly Hot, Hot, Hot. And I honestly think it's probably one of the, top 100 or 200 greatest, songs of all time. You'll find out, if you haven't already discovered this through reading, that I'm not shy about what I believe about music. Music is something that will always mean the absolute most to me, other than the people in my life, other than all my children and the other people I love. It's right up at the top. And so I'm going to kind of let it fly and let you know what I think about things. If you don't agree, I really want to hear it, because that is an awesome way to discuss. If you do agree, let me know too, because there's excitement and passion in finding a kindred spirit. So That said, and all the greatness that is The Cure and Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, let me tie it into a song that I've done. There are a couple dozen songs, easy, that have been influenced by The Cure. I could even say that because they're in my top 5, pretty much every song I've ever done is in some way influenced by them. Doesn't mean that the music sounds at all like them. At times it does. There's a song from my album Parts and Labor, which is everywhere: Spotify, iTunes, YouTube. Just, I don't know, pick it's everywhere. It's been out for a few years now. It's a song I love to play live. I've done it with a full band. I've done it acoustically, and it has a certain there's an emotional pull there that gets to places that I think pop songs can and should often get to. Maybe not always. It has a darkness to it, has a sadness to it, has a brightness to it. It has a dynamism to it that carries throughout the song, and it's called Break You. I can't remember if I said that already. The link is below, and I hope you listen to it. You will probably be able to see how certain elements of the guitar, the vocals, the lyrics, especially the vulnerability in the lyrics, were influenced by The Cure. And bringing it back around to The Cure, as always, I'll talk about my favorite tracks from this album. Here's the back cover. Eerie, yes. I am not going to talk about my favorites this week, sorry, because this is a double album that I have listened to over and over and over again, and although I could probably say, oh, this one, maybe not as favorite, once you get past 10 songs, there's really no point in talking about what your favorites are. So instead, I am going to point out a song that most of you probably don't know, but you really should. It's called How Beautiful You Are. It is a perfect example of what The Cure does best. It's a beautiful song, both lyrically and sonically. It's a song that is both delicate and firm and robust all at the same time, and I think ties in quite well with my song Break You. If you have, let's say, I guess it would be about 8 minutes, check out both of those songs. Go ahead and listen to my song Break You. Go ahead and listen to, look up How Beautiful You Are by The Cure. And thank you for watching me and listening to me and reading with me all of these years, or just today, and welcome. And as always, until next week, discuss, damn it.
Something I wanted to tell you, I don't know how to say. I'll only speak when you want me to. Oh, what do I have to do so I won't break you? Whisper into the pillow, cover my mouth with black tape, tie up my hands with a rope or two. Oh, what do I have to do so I won't break you? Oh, it's silly but I'm thinking really you'd be better off running away, or I can just throw away all my frustration, bury my anger in pain, the clubs, knives, and ammo too. Oh, I'll do what I have to do, so I won't break.
Hey everyone, welcome to week 176 and video episode number 2 of the Thursday Throwback Track. As always, we're going through my collection, currently on my LPs, vinyl, albums, records, whatever you all want to call them, discussing some of my favorite music and how it's influenced the music I've done. Again, as in video number 1, I'm keeping it kind of easy for myself because, you know, it's all about me. And sticking with one of my top 5 bands of the 15 that I continually keep referring to. And this one is kind of not a surprising one. It's U2 and their first album, Boy, which was released in 1980, 4 years after they formed. It is a seminal album, of course. I don't know if where it ranks as far as my favorite U2 albums. I'm sure you may not know it. It's one of their lesser known albums. They did have a couple of hits on there, some of which they still play. The most famous one being I Will Follow, which I'll talk more about that later. And, other than that, it was seminal because it helped to launch their career, really, and launched them in the U.S. because they toured there and from the get-go started to gain fame for their version of the post-punk genre. Post-punk has a lot of definitions, a lot of subgenres, but for me, and again, I'm referring to my notes in front of me here, the post-punk that I like, that I associate with that genre name, is rhythmic, ambient, crisp, sparse, melodic, emotional, both organic and electronic as far as instruments goes, and both pop and experimental. And some other bands that might fit in that category, especially in the way I just described it, would be The Cure, again, Joy Division, who became New Order, The Jam, a lesser-known band who everyone should listen to. They weren't around long, but man, did they influence a lot of people, including Block Party. And PIL, Public Image Limited, which was John Lydon, or Johnny Rotten's band, who came out of the Sex Pistols. So in some ways, in a couple of these, at least, post-punk was literally post-punk. It was after one of them or more of the members had done punk and decided to branch out and make it a little bit, more eclectic. And that's where we are. So, again, U2 was another band like The Cure, like the Beatles, like some of my, like Prince, that showed me what was possible in music. They introduced me to things that I hadn't heard before. Again, I was introduced to them by a good friend of mine from high school, and then I dug back into their old catalog. I think at the time, The Unforgettable Fire was out, and that I think still probably ranks as my favorite U2 album, or certainly in the top three. And once I heard songs from that, I said, I have to hear the rest of this. And so at the time, I went to Full Circle Record Exchange, which anybody who grew up in South Jersey might know is one of the great indie record shops, and found as many old U2 albums as I could. And if I didn't go there, I went to Tower Records like everyone else. And because I'm kind of anal about certain things, I go in order. So I started with Boy, being their first album. What I liked about U2 is what I like about a lot of music, and what I try to bring to my music, which is they had, and they've talked about this in subsequent interviews, they had a reverence for what existed then in the 70s. They loved punk. They loved what was going on in the late 70s. They loved disco and funk and all that stuff. They also had a reverence for what came before. Some people who know them fairly well might liken them to The Who in terms of their big, bold sound, their emotionality, and certain other things. The fact that it was guitar centered and all of that, and yet through all of that, they without really maybe even thinking about it, made their own rules for what music could be, or for how to interpret everything that they were absorbing, which I think every artist does, and I just happen to find fascinating. I try to talk about that a lot in terms of my music, which is pretty much what this whole series is about. But to examine other artists and see where they came from, and where they ended up going is just. It's amazing. Even in their earliest incarnations, when they weren't quite fully formed, like on U2's Boy, you can still hear them as being them. You can hear their own unique take on music, their personality, their quirks. You can hear all the influences that they had, and you get a real strong sense of where they ended up going. I know that's kind of hindsight, vision, but it works. You really, if U2 isn't your favorite band, that's cool. Try it with a band you love, and go back and listen to their first album and say, oh wow, yeah, I can hear elements from their 10th album or 5th album on that first album. It's actually pretty awesome. And I know they changed throughout the years. They added new elements. They de-emphasized some. They emphasized others. They got better at certain things. One thing I remember pretty famously in the late 80s, early 90s is Bono talking about his falsetto and how he wasn't all that good at it early on. And man, that became one of his go-tos throughout the 90s and beyond. So things like that, great artists continuously grow, they continuously absorb, and they continuously kind of regurgitate what they know from a real kind of heartfelt and unique place, and yet through all these changes, they're still U2, just the way the Stones are still the Stones. And and the way I'm discovering by sharing with you on Saturdays my old songs, in reverse chronology, that as many changes as I've gone through, I started with the same elements that I have now. I know there were certain things again, just like with U2, I've abandoned, or I've gotten better at, or I've emphasized or not, but all of those same elements are there, and they're really kind of the elements I listed in that first paragraph. Rhythmic, ambient, crisp, sparse, melodic, emotional, both organic and electronic, both pop and experimental. A lot of my production isn't as sparse as some of the post-punk bands. I like to layer a lot of layers, but not for everything, which I'll talk about a little later as well. Now, the subtitle for the text for this week 176 is what I do for music. And I just had a gig last night, so my voice is kind of tired, and we played a set of songs that we prepared, more or less, and the audience, the crowd, was a birthday party, loved it so much that they asked us to play more. And because it was a band that we haven't quite done all this stuff before, we weren't sure where we were going, so we just took requests, and we either half knew it or didn't know it, or one of us knew it, and we just all jump in. So there were at least 5 songs last night that I played. on stage that I had never played before in any capacity in my life, and it was one of the most fun gigs I've ever had. But you know, some other illustration of what I do for music goes back to and refers back to U2, which is when I was in college, I had a friend in the acting program, Ralph Colombino, who had a band that almost got signed. It's a totally different story. They had some originals, one of which I love and hope to share someday because I still have a cassette copy of it. And they did a bunch of covers, and Ralph's two favorite bands were The Who and U2, and he saw the similarities between the two, and he brought that out in his band. So I co-produced a music night at one of the college centers there at Rutgers, which featured a bunch of artists, including me. I did a cover, an original, and Ralph's band. And one of the songs Ralph's band played was U2's "I Will Follow," which still ranks as not just one of the top, songs from this album, certainly, and from U2 in general, but of all time for me. And what happened was their drummer forgot to bring his rug or anything that would keep the kit from sliding across the tile floor. And so, because the show must go on, and because of my intense love for music and wanting to just kind of, help any other artist, I volunteered as the host to sit in front of the kit, my back to the kick drum, put my hands on my ears as tightly as I could, and for the duration of their very short set, I think it was 3 songs, prevent the kit from sliding forward so that the drummer and they could have as kick-ass of a set as they possibly could. And I loved every minute of it, just like I loved every minute of last night's insanely impromptu show. So going back to U2 and referring it or connecting it to my music, lots of my songs have been influenced by U2 in one way or another, but there's a particular song that an old friend of mine, the minute she heard it, said, "This reminds me of U2, and in fact reminds me of early U2. I don't know if she referenced "I Will Follow," but in general, that's what she said. And I mean, it thrilled me because I know that the song I wrote came from a pretty specific and original place, but the way I produced it, I wanted it to have that energy. I don't know if I specifically thought of U2, but I know they were in my head in some way. And that song is called Little White Lies, and it's from my EP Distance to Empty. The links, again, are all at the bottom here, including a different version of what I just said. I urge you and welcome you to click the link for U2's Boy and explore that. Click the link for Little White Lies and listen to that. It's one of my personal favorites, especially from that that EP. And to tell me what your favorites from this album might be, what your favorites from U2 might be. If you don't like U2 at all, if there's another band that you have the same feeling about, I really want this discussion to continue week after week. So please, leave your comments. And don't forget, you can find all of the music that I share of mine on pretty much any streaming service, iTunes, Spotify, even YouTube, all of that. So please explore further. You can go to my SoundCloud page, which I often link. You can go to my Bandcamp page, which I often link. You can go to my website, nickdimatteo.com. I am more than happy to share anything with you personally as well if you have any requests. And as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for reading. Thank you for discussing. And until next week, this is Nick DiMatteo and the Thursday Throwback Track.
Double lie, but I can't
Hey everyone, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to week 177 and video episode number 3 of 4T, the Thursday throwback track. This week's band is a personal hometown Philadelphia, Pennsylvania favorite of mine, the Dead Milkmen, and their first 4 albums, which I have on LP, and they are Big Lizard in My Backyard, Eat Your Paisley, Bucky Fellini, and Beelzebubba. I also have their subsequent 2 albums on cassette. And those first 6 albums I dove into head first and never came up for air, really, until sometime in the early 90s when things started to wane for them. But up until that point, they were a pretty seminal band for me. I had seen them live several times, mostly in and around South Street, and including the historic and famous Trocadero Theater, which was a theater and a burlesque hall and a music venue ever since 1870 until it apparently, I just read, closed earlier this year. I have a feeling it'll be open again at some point because it's been around forever, and I'm sure it had lean years prior to this. But who knows? I was happy to have not only seen shows there, but played there once with my old band, Ape Cafe. It's a great place. South Street in general, great place. The Dead Milkmen, very connected, not just to Philly, but to South Street in particular. For those of you who have any knowledge of this band at all, you probably know their song Punk Rock Girl, which was their only giant hit. I think it was around 1988. And they mentioned South Street and a lot of places on South Street and things like that. If you know them at all, again, that may be where you know them from. Or if you're from Philly, you have probably heard of them and are old enough to have heard of them. They were a second wave punk band in that, punk started in the 70s. And they started in the mid 80s. Really, they were formed in '83. Their first album, Big Lizard in My Backyard, came out in 1985. So they're really very much of the '80s, especially when they were kind of in their cult and developing years and into their brief period of commercial success. And so they had been influenced by earlier punk bands like the Dead Kennedys. I had always thought that they got their name from the Dead Kennedys and were just making a joke about the name because it seems silly to combine the words dead and milkmen. And I think that still probably was part of the influence there. And you can tell if you know anything about the Dead Milkmen, they're funny. They're always trying to be funny in either very open ways or very subversive ways. They have pointed, jagged lyrics. They had pretty adolescent lyrics back in the 80s for some of their songs, but as they developed, they got a little bit more. I don't know. Their lyrics got better. But from the beginning and really still till this day, they have that kind of pointed irreverence in both their lyrics and their music. What I found out in reading about them is that according to the main dude, they actually got their name from a character from a Toni Morrison novel, which I think the character was named Milkman Dead or something like that. I don't know much about it. Sad thing is, I think I read that novel a long, long time ago, but I don't remember anything, honestly, at this point, unless I look it up again. I don't know. But I can tell you a whole lot about not just the Dead Milkmen, but Philly music in general. Anybody who is either from Philly or knows anything about Philly knows that it is a huge music town. To this day, and certainly back in the last several decades, their radio to me was more vibrant than than even New York City. And I've been in New York City for 20 years. And back when radio was a thing, which was still sort of a thing when I moved here, I was pretty disappointed in the pickings here. And I can tell you in Philly that there was pretty much every single thing on the radio. Philly is and was that and has always been really that kind of town. It's sort of in an area where a lot of different things meet. You have the kind of Northeast influence. You have the further out into the Midwest influence, sort of, or the North Central and that kind of area, and of course the Southern influence and things like that. All of that came together in kind of an urban/suburban way with touches of everything else to form various versions what is known as Philadelphia music. My dad, for those of you who know me, you may know my dad. My dad was a huge Philadelphia music star in the 1950s and 60s. He even toured nationally and in Canada and South America, and rock and roll reviews and things like that. He was a big band singer and everything. And he benefited from being in Philadelphia and being a part of one of the big scenes there. The jazz was a huge thing in Philly and still is, but when it was really developing, Philly was one of the important places for jazz. Doo-wop and 50s music, lots of bands in the 50s from the Philadelphia area, lots of songwriters too. In the 70s, there was Philadelphia Soul, and that's huge. If anybody knows Philly Soul, or anything about Philly music, they probably know Philly Soul. In the 80s, when I grew up, there were bands that were either just starting to make their name or maybe had a little before, like Joan Jett from that area, the Hooters, Robert Hazard and the Heroes. Robert Hazard also kind of came to fame as being the songwriter of Girls Just Want to Have Fun for Cyndi Lauper. And one of the bands from Philly was actually Cyndi Lauper's backing band for a while. And there were other bands who were starting out in the 80s but hadn't quite hit their stride or their big fame, such as Boyz II Men, Will Smith, Fresh Prince, The Roots, who are now on TV every week, and Live, Throwing Copper, that band, if anybody knows, I think Lightning Crash or something like that, something in the 90s. They actually started in the 80s. Well, I started in the 80s too, and so I was immersed in all of that, and I was immersed in the Philly attitude toward music, which is, if it's good music, it's good music. It doesn't matter what kind of music is. And what that did to artists growing up in Philly in many ways, and let me not forget, having mentioned the Roots and Fresh Prince and all, that Philly was a huge and very seminal city for development of hip-hop too, in the early 80s, even as far back as that. But what that did for artists who grew up in and around Philadelphia, and I grew up mostly in South Jersey, although I was born, in Philadelphia and had and still have relatives there, is that it created this sort of amalgam of styles that each artist manifested and expressed in a different way. So many of the bands who come from Philly have kind of a mix of styles that combines both the idea of being true to the form of whatever that is. If, for example, with the Dead Milkmen, it was punk and surf punk and that, and that kind of thing, but also observing it from the outside, from a slight remove, in kind of the way that Philly is a slight remove from New York, and so commenting on it in a way too, which is something that Dead Milkmen did a lot. They did, they didn't just do the lyrical commentary in their music. They commented on the music they were doing by, in some ways, poking fun at it or sending it up or doing meta versions of a punk, song, and you can hear that in a lot of bands in general, but in a lot of Philly bands throughout the years, and certainly in pretty much all the music I do, that sort of mix of styles that is both, reverent of the whatever genre that you happen to be doing at the time, but also kind of irreverent, kind of picking it apart, poking fun at it, doing things a little bit more experimental, adding some quirky things in. And an interesting thing about the Dead Milkmen style is that it captured something that a lot of people don't know about Philly and South Jersey, which is there were a lot and may still be a lot of skaters and surfers in that area. And I happen to be with someone now who is from California, and I've always been fascinated with that state. I've been there a few times and would like to spend a lot more time out there actually. But as far as music goes, that kind of surf punk and all of that stuff, or even that California punk like Agent Orange is a good example from the 80s, has been somewhat of a favorite of mine. Or Waves, the band with two V's, that's more recent, another great example. The Dead Milkmen had that sound, and they showed that Philly area actually had a lot of that kind of, surf punk, skater punk attitude to it. And it's something that's, certainly influenced a good portion of what I've done, at any rate. But the big thing about the Dead Milkmen, as anybody who knows them knows, is that they were goofs. They were intended to be funny. They were more irreverent, but equally as goofy as, let's say, they might be Giants or people like that. They predated a band like Presidents of the United States of America, who did that song Peaches in the 90s. They were able to make songs at times that had a good, strong pop sensibility, but still maintain their goofiness and their kind of often lack of regard for certain, aspects of lyrical structure and things like that. And that's one of the reasons I love them, because they clearly loved the music they were doing, but they did it and acted like they didn't care. And that, of course, that's part of the punk attitude. It's to, throw away the old and not get so caught up in having your, getting your chops down perfect and all that stuff. And there was always that division between hippies and prog rock, and then punk and new wave and all that stuff. And the Dead Milkmen certainly played up on that in both, I think, probably a sincere way, but also in kind of a send-up commentary way, like we're punks and we're going to hate hippies. So they did a song like The Thing That Only Eats Hippies, or, Beach Party Vietnam, and things like that were clearly meant to be satirical and honestly really just goofy. And humor, I think, can be very open and abrasive and in your face in music, but it can also be very subtle. And they did both. But there are other bands, or big bands, even the Beatles and Billy Joel and bands straight up until today, a lot of hip hop artists who weave humor into their lyrics in ways that you might not readily catch. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy doing. And so you can hear some of that in a lot of the music that I've put out right up until this day. And that's one of the ways in which the Dead Milkmen influenced me. And I'm happy to say that through all of their ups and downs and the unfortunate suicide of one of their members in 2004, they broke up years before that. They reformed again years later, I think in 2008. They are still around. They're still performing. They're with a local Philly label that is a socially conscious label that gives part of its proceeds to charity. And their recent material, and I think they put out an EP in 2017 is the latest thing that they released, is as good as, and honestly, I think is better than their older material. And that's one of my favorite things, is a band that is supposedly from one era who is still around, who has still been around. It's kind of like the story of Philadelphia. There's a sense of being the underdog, the sense of being slightly removed from the action, but still kind of in the action, and yet never giving up, always knowing that somehow you're in the mix. You may have a weird way of doing it, or kind of a insider/outsider way of doing it, and yet you're still there. And that's the Dead Milkmen. That's so many things about Philadelphia in general, and that's and then that's me. That's a lot of what I do with my music too. So a couple of examples of songs that can be somewhat directly linked to the Dead Milkmen. And again, you can find the link to Dead Milkmen info and these two songs in the text below. Are my recent song, The Garden, which is going to be on an upcoming EP, Sympathy for the Weird, which I'll be releasing in the next month or two. And a slightly older song from 2015 from my album, The Sunshine Seminar, Xmiss, which is spelled Xmiss. The lyrics are, they fit into that kind of Dead Milkman feel of either just out and out goofy like The Garden and what is exactly it's supposed to mean. I don't know, it's riffing on something, or Xmiss, which has a real jagged, commentary on a relationship, feel to the lyrics, but it clearly has some humor in it too, straight from the title, straight on to the end of the song. So I urge you, as always, to listen to the band that I'm discussing, the Dead Milkmen. Listen to any track or tracks that I share of mine. Everything's always in the links. You can also go to recarea.bandcamp.com. You can go to my SoundCloud page. You can go to my website, nickdimatteo.com. You can find all of this stuff everywhere. Scroll down and look at the text below, which is not in any way a transcript of what I've just said. That does have some additional information, including some of my favorite tracks from these 4 albums. And thank you again for listening. And I hope to see you again next week. And don't forget to please comment, whether that's in audio or video or text, or send me a link, or talk to me about why you like this band, why you hate this band, or any other band that you think might be related or completely unrelated to the topic this week. I'm always trying to start conversations. That's what the Thursday Throwback Track is all about. That's what generally my music career has been all about. Thank you again, and I will see you next week.
Oh my love, you wait for me in the garden. Oh my love, you wait for me in the garden. The garden is full of people. People don't like me, I don't like them. The garden is full of people. People don't like me, and I don't like them. Oh my love, you wait for me in the garden. Oh my love, you wait for me in the garden. The garden is growing, time don't like me, and I don't like it. Garden is growing, time don't like me, and I don't like it. Oh my love, you wait for me in the garden. Oh my love, you wait for me in the garden. The garden is full of people. People don't like me, and I don't like them. The garden is full of people, and people don't like me, and I don't like them. Oh, the garden is wasting time don't like me, and I don't like it. The garden is growing, time don't like me, and I don't like it. Oh my love, you wait for me in the garden. Oh my love, you wait for me in the garden. The garden. I can't say why you Christmas Day.